Hey beautiful blooms, and happy All Saints Wake! To usher in the season, I'm going to take you on a deliciously macabre tour of a house I designed for my friend Maple Moon. Back in December 2022, they wanted a home that embraced gothic aesthetics with a dash of inspiration from the far eastern region of Suino Sato. I'll also be breaking down some of the more complicated elements of the build, starting with the entrance. So let's go. The specific request for Maple Moon was they wanted to channel the overall vibe of the Addams family, which if you've ever watched any of Moon's videos, that's probably not a surprise to you. But from the get-go, I knew this meant rich colors paired with fun patterns, and I wanted to use the front door to set that tone. So to do that, I used stage panels and wood slat partitions to create a custom striped wall that could actually be dyed. And a wondrous wind door is, well, it's the door. The overall color palette I was given at the time was purples, pinks, cool blues, and greens, and so I decided to dye the door a deep, rich purple. This way it had a touch of character and paired well with the golden accents on it. The wooden walls surrounding the entrance are actually imitation wooden skylights, and this item is great if you need to make custom walls in tight spaces. And this is because it is a wall-mounted item that provides collisions, so your camera won't go flying through them and they can be sunk into the walls with the help of something like wooden beam. So they're perfect for little nooks like this. Now the rest of the ground floor is divided into three main parts. You have the breakfast nook in the west, the kitchen to the north, and a reading nook to the east. The breakfast nook was actually really simple and didn't require a whole lot of glitching. The primary space that I want to break down is actually the nook's window. The window is comprised of an Aurora phasmoscape with manor bookshelves to create the window panes, and you can actually see the little white bit from the phasmoscape itself, and I didn't mind letting that show because that created a nice backing for the Yulmoren divan that makes up the cushions, and it's perfectly usable. You can sit on it. There's more than one manor bookshelf. There's two on the sides to create a little bit of a book nook, as if there weren't enough books in the build already, but they're there, and they also help make sure everything was nice and neat and tidy. Now the walls around the window are just blank glade partitions, and I ended up choosing those because I really liked the wooden and gold borders all around blank glade partitions. They really fit the vibe I was going for with this build, and on top of that, I needed to be item slot conscious because this house does use both floors. I find that most people that I build small houses for, they do want both floors, and I totally understand why. So blank glade partitions let me actually have walls with collision with as few items as possible, but it kept that rich feel to it with their border colors and the wainscoting they come with. And it's also the top of the window too, that nice big thick wooden part that you can see. As you can see, I also went with the House Burrell wallpaper because it's such a beautiful blue. I don't get to use it very often, and it was spot on for what I needed for this build. It fit the vibe perfectly. Next is the kitchen, which is the focal point when you first enter the house. Now, one of the first things I really wanted to do was split the northern half of the ground floor into two spaces, the kitchen and the hallway leading to the basement stairs. And the reason I wanted to do this is because the doorway to the basement is tucked so close to the northeastern corner pillar that you can't really do a whole lot of anything there unless you are cutting off access to the basement completely, which we weren't doing here. So the kitchen took the northwestern corner, and in order to bring in some of that gothic architecture that I really wanted to incorporate from Imperium and from just the vibe in general, funny enough, I actually used the Oasis canopy bed. They make the arches you see near the ceiling, and this worked surprisingly well despite being an old Dawn item because the footboards have these nice see-through arch shapes, and in the lighting we managed to create matched the glade pillar pretty well and blended in without really sticking out any. The walls behind it are just some stage panels dyed really deep blue. Unfortunately, it's been long enough I've forgotten which blue exactly, but I matched it as close to the House Burrell wallpaper as I possibly could. The Oasis canopy Beds act as a ceiling for the kitchen as well, but they don't provide collision, unfortunately. So there's a couple of NPC vendor beds hidden up there too, so that your camera doesn't go flying. Now, as for the kitchen itself, there are more tricks here than there is in the rest of the ground floor. They're not particularly difficult, but I did want to cover them anyway. For example, the upper cabinets is just a one rustic chocobo counter turned backwards so you get the cute little cabinets with the eggshell handles. And then the exhaust fan for the stove from the southern kitchen stove is just an FC chest turned around. Very simple, very easy, floated with the float anything glitch. And that is something I really strive for when I build for, well, I'm more conscious of it when I build for someone else, but I try to do it when I build for myself too, is I want anything that has a function that I think someone might use is accessible regardless if you're playing with keyboard or mouse or with a controller. And it is. And the FC chest is at this height. The other reason I care about accessibility is for seasonal decorations. That's one of the perks of having a house. You finally get to use these things, right? And if you've seen this build before on Housing Snap, which I'll leave a link to that in the description below, you'll notice that there's actually like starlight decorations instead in the screenshots, and that's because, like I said in the beginning of this video, I did this December of last year, so all of the All Saints Wake items you see out and about, that was actually placed by Maple Moon themselves without my help. And I want to make sure every time I build a house that is as easy as possible to do without glitching, because if I'm building for someone else, I don't want them to have to rely on me. And then for myself, while it's a pain in the neck to have to constantly take things away so you can safely glitch without moving a wall-mounted item or a rug or something and getting something caught and causing a lot of damage to a build. So that is something I always recommend when someone is wanting to get into these more advanced glitch builds, is please make sure that you leave yourself some wiggle room, that you can change small items on the fly like this. Like they're cute little Halloween candles. I love these. They're one of my favorite items. Okay, gushing over. One of the things I really wanted to do for the kitchen was I really wanted to get this kind of old-timey, classic, dramatic window over the sink. And this was easier than it looks. It's just a really simple imitation stained crystal pane with two Glade drawers on top, the small ones. They're side by side, back to back, and they're long ways so that you get the arch shape. And the sink itself is really simple. It's a trick I learned from HG14, which if you haven't watched their videos yet, you really should. That's where I learned all of my basics from. The gray sink basin is another rustic chocobo counter floated up from the basement so that only the top peeks through. And then the blue backing is the Crystarium till. Very simple, very easy. As a tabletop item, it can get finicky. I tried to raise it a little higher than it is now, but it kept wanting to sink to the floor, and I didn't want to spend the item slot to raise it higher. And then the faucet, ale tap. Classic, it works. Now, as for the counters, I probably shouldn't be as proud of these as I am, but these are actually some of my favorite counters I've ever made, and they're extremely simple. The black base is just the corner counters. You don't have to do anything to them, you don't have to float them or anything, just place them where you want them. Now the countertops, those are Oasis open shelf bookcases, and I love this as a countertop. First of all, they are a table item. So like I mentioned earlier, if you want to swap tabletop items, you want to swap seasonal decorations, you can do so easily on these. They are a table, they will go on there. You don't even need a storage glitch place items. Now these are floated up from the basement, so it will take some time to align them correctly. And if you would like to see a video tutorial about that, feel free to let me know in the comments below. There are a good number of them already, but if you would want me to explain it the way I am now, let me know and I will try and get a video of that out. But anyway, they're floated up from the basement and they provide color. They provide texture. Like I said, Maple Moon really wanted purples, greens, cool blues, and the Oasis open shelf bookcases have a purple tone to the wood and the little turquoise accents to give us that blue-green, and the gold framing matches all the other gold accents in the house. So I'm actually extremely proud of this one, despite it being such a simple trick, and I'm hoping to use it in some more builds. Now, if you recall, one of the other inspirations, aside from the Addams Family aesthetic, the Gothic architecture from Imperium and Ishgard, was Suino Sato, which if you haven't played Stormblood yet, spoiler alert, if you're somehow coming here from outside of Final Fantasy XIV, it's basically a Japanese village for mermaids. That is the best way I can think of to describe it without getting too much into detail. Not that there's mermaids, but one of the races in game lives underwater, and so we wanted to incorporate Far Eastern and underwater elements in order to make that work. And so one of the ways I wanted to do this was actually through the big window scene that smacks you right in the face as soon as you turn the corner from coming down the stairs. That is the focal point, and again, very simple but packs a punch. For starters, the window is framed with 4 House Fortum fireplaces. That's the white and gold marbling that you see. And then the floor molding that separates the indoors from the outdoors is just a wooden beam sunk into the floor. Very simple trick, but adds a nice level of detail to your floor plan. The wooden structures are once again those delightful imitation wooden skylights. They're great. They provide that collision, and one thing in particular is small houses have a bit of a double-edged sword to them. The upper floor is half the size of the basement. It sucks if you prefer having everything on the ground floor and you don't want to hide in the basement all the time. So your space, as you saw, it can get a little cramped if you're not careful with your floor plan. But the cool thing about it that you can do in small houses that you can't do in any other form of housing in the game is you can use the southern half of your room in your basement, and you can float things up without touching anything on the ground floor as long as you stay behind the chandelier in the basement. And that's what I did here for this little window scene, was I could freely move everything up into the basement. It didn't mess with anything upstairs, and it was the perfect spot to put a feature like this. So that's why I could safely float these imitation wooden skylights. It was really, really helpful. Now, the little cobblestone that you see on the outside portion of the scene is just a flagstone loft. I actually dyed it green here to give it more of a mossy look, a nice dark green. And then the actual skybox is just 3 Aurora Phasmascapes. Super simple, love them. They match with the rest of the house. This beautiful coral piece is just crystallized coral. I love it because it actually has a bubble effect, not just visual but audio too, and it's honestly one of my favorite items in the game for that reason. I just love it. I honestly kind of want to find a way to do a bubble bath with these, but I don't know if that's going to be possible. We'll see, maybe in a future build. The fence is just a bunch of swinging door counters. I honestly don't remember how many of these there were. I think it was a lot. You need a lot of them to get this seamless look for it. So make sure you have the item slots left over before you attempt it. And then finally, just to get some light in this area, even though the jellyfish lamps and the crystallized coral provide a lot of light, as do the Phasmascapes, I still wanted to have some god rays coming through, and so there is a cracked arch window hidden behind one of the Phasmascapes so that you can get that. You'll also notice that I've put another gargoyle here to protect the Maplemen while they're in bed, because who doesn't want a little gargoyle friend watching over them while they're sleeping? I thought it was funny, they seemed to enjoy it, and so happy to have that there. Now, as we direct our attention to the final area of the build, this is the personal study. This is a place for quiet, for reflection, for doing research, including things that may not necessarily be on the up and up. This is probably the spot that has the most Hinken influence, thanks to the kotatsu table, the zabuton cushions, and also the frame for the aquarium. This is just a tier 3 aquarium. I wanted it to actually be an art piece for this space, because aquariums have an opportunity to provide light and provide color that you might not otherwise get from the static paintings and portraits. They also add depth. And so this is just, like I said, this is just a tier 3 aquarium, not the metal one, just the normal one, so you can get the wood and the gold accents that are present throughout the rest of the house. And then we actually used the moonlit trimmings that drop from the Tsukuyomi EX. So I'm sorry if you have to go do that to get these. I don't think they're too expensive on the market board anymore. I could be very wrong. It's been a bit. Now the aquarium is framed by 2 Hinken bookshelves and then 2 Hinken sideboards on the bottom. This was important because since this was built in the basement, you can't float any furnishing class or table class items through the floor. As for the rest of the room, the only other real trick that I had to do was, you'll notice that there are glade half partitions up towards the ceiling, right where the sculpture is above the aquarium. And the reason I wanted to do that was to give some unity to the room, because those are white rug partitions behind the aquarium. That's not an actual glade partition, and I wanted to do that because I wanted a nice flat color. I wanted that nice warm purple so that we kept the color scheme through the rest of the house, but warmed it up a bit since this is supposed to be a place of reflection and relaxation. And so to keep everything looking cohesive, created my own architecture by floating up those half partitions, and I think it was worth the effort. And that's it. That's really all there is that needed to have a more detailed breakdown. Small houses in general, especially if you build in both floors, at the time of this post, they only have 200 item slots you can use. So you do have to rein it in with how many glitches you use to create the home design. And I actually love these projects for that reason, because I feel like it's a great barrier of entry to housing in general in Final Fantasy XIV. A lot of people feel like you can't make a pretty house unless you just glitch everything. And so projects like these, I want to show people that you can have a pretty home. You can have a home that feels like you with very minimal glitching. Like, as you saw, there's really not a lot here that needed glitching. On top of that, this is my first video on the channel, and so you haven't seen it yet, but I tend to prefer doing bright and colorful and sunny builds. So when Maple Moon came to me wanting something a little bit more dark, a little more gothic, a little bit more edge, I was absolutely thrilled to be able to take on this project, and I'm still so thankful to Maple Moon for letting me design their house for them. And I just want to say thank you all so much for stopping by. If you loved my housing tour and you found my break it down guides helpful, please do consider subscribing and clicking the bell. YouTube's notification system sucks, so if you don't want to miss any future videos from me, that's the way to do it. Until next time, see you then!